Hello and welcome again to a special edition of the Rising Generation podcast interviews with myself, Errol Lawson. I'm the author of From the Postcode to the Globe and Teenpreneur, How to Build a Business in Your Teens. And our organization, Emerge Leadership, goes into schools across the UK and different parts of the world, delivering workshops for teachers, parents and students and mentoring and coaching programs to help them to overcome limitations and realize their full potential. In this special episode, I've got an old friend of mine with me, Raymond Douglas. Raymond represents an organization called Anti-Youth Violence, and they're doing what I believe is some of the most groundbreaking work, working with young people exposed to gangs, exposed to youth violence, in prisons, in the community, in faith-based organizations. They're working with practitioners across the country, coaching, training, and helping them to better impact or better support the young people that they're working with. And so in this conversation, Ray and I talk about the challenges that are affecting our young people today, some of the main barriers, how we overcome those barriers, some of his personal experiences in working with young people, addressing the matter of youth violence. It's a really powerful interview. Raymond Douglas is available for work as well, I'm sure, but take a listen of this. Please share with your friends and with your colleagues, your practitioners, your family members who are working with challenging young people. For more information, of course, get in touch with us directly. You can email me personally at errol@errollawson.com, or you can go to our website, www.emerge-leadership.com. Thanks for listening, guys. Enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson, and my very special guest today is Raymond Douglas. Raymond is one of the UK's leading thinkers and doers around working with at-risk young people and adults. A prolific trainer and curriculum developer, he has created numerous intervention programs tackling youth conflict, violence and assistance, aiming to reduce the number of those at risk of life-threatening behaviour involving guns, gangs, and knife crime and extremism. Ray has been an approved trainer for the Youth Justice Board and has delivered to senior managers and currently delivers resettlement programs within the secure estate. Ray spoke at TEDx and has worked nationally and internationally, training and advising local authorities around reducing systematic youth violence reduction. Today, his Gangology program reaches over 10,000 young people and pupils per year. Ray, great to have you with us today, man.
Thank you, Errol. Long time.
Yeah, man, great to have you. So I know it's been a long time, Ray, and there's so much that I see you're doing just through social media and working with young people. Before we go into our interview, Ray, and our conversation, give us a glimpse into what you're up to in the world right now.
Right now, in an era of my own, in the sense of having worked around this agenda for close to 20 years, I'm in a space now where I think as a practitioner, I need to be thinking about innovation and legacy. And for me, I have no shadow of a doubt that if we want to be effective around reducing youth violence specifically, then we have to really start looking at it from a public health perspective.
Right.
So that's where I'm at currently, and I'm doing as much as I can to implement that theory.
Awesome. And just give us our listeners and myself as well, a bit of background. How did you end up doing the work that you're doing today? Like, what's your story? What's your backstory?
Well, I've always been involved in youth work from as soon as I left school. I've forever been involved. So I volunteered actually at Barnardo's from about 16, and then was offered a position at local council at 17, and then just continuously built up my skill set. and that was kind of like old school youth work activities, interventions, and things like that. But as time went on, you started to see young people get caught up in more type of activities that were life threatening. Whilst that was happening, I retrained as an adult teacher, and just felt that there was a really need to do a targeted approach to respond to youth violence. Hence why I launched some of the programs that I did. So, but what I did is I amalgamated the disciplines of youth work alongside the disciplines of teaching.
Cool. And so right now you got your organization, Gangology?
Yeah, I mean, Gangology is more like a platform than an organization,
Okay.
in the sense of, for those who know me or don't know me, I've forever kind of tried to shine a light on the issues surrounding young people and violence, but I do it with a more nuanced approach. I don't just say, put down the gun, put down the knife. I look at the factors behind it. Why do we have such an increase in young people involved in that culture? So Gangology is more like a platform and a conversation as opposed to an organization.
Okay. So what's the organization called?
The overarching organization is called Anti-Youth Violence. Okay. But Gangology is the kind of the twin.
Okay. Awesome. Now, I know recently I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and the front page on the Evening Standard was 2 men stabbed to death in London in 90 minutes as a knife crime has gone up by a quarter in London, is what they're saying. We're all out here and we're praying and we're trying to get our heads around. Even today, I was contacted by Radio 5 Live asking me to come on and speak about gangs using acid as a weapon. Us in our generation probably we have been thinking for a while. I think that the next generation, the younger ones coming after us, are a lot more callous, a lot colder. So we're not surprised in some ways because we kind of saw them coming up and saw, wow, these young ones are different, So we're kind of seeing that bear fruit now. But as you're traveling around the country, what are you seeing? What is the current reality? What's the current state of youth violence, youth culture? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting book by a guy called Adrian Rain that talks about the anatomy of violence, the biological roots of crime. Mm-hmm. And if you read books like that and similar books, it very much looks at violence from a relative perspective. So, are we actually in more violent times, or is it that we're exposed to more violence?
Right.
Which is an interesting conversation. The thing for me, though, the position I sit with this is that now you have what's called systemic youth violence. So systemic youth violence. So we always hear about the Manchesters and the Londons and the Birminghams of this world and Liverpools, etc., and how violence is an epidemic there. But what's occurred now over the last 5 to 10 years is that you have more kind of non-traditional violent towns, if that makes sense. The Stokes of this world and all these types of places where you see a 30% of increase in knife crime. You see white working class males involved in gang culture and mirroring some of the things you see in the bigger cities. So and this is something that we foresee over 10 years ago, Errol, and spoke to many people about it. And that if we didn't, because I really believe this myself. I think a lot of people in the early days thought that this phenomena, which has gone back to knife crime, but this phenomena of youth violence would pass. And you, as a man who's a man of scripture, that saying about it shall come to pass. But we see now where all over the country, and remember my position on this because I deliver in schools and prisons and everywhere in between. So I see that continuum of, well, from a very young age, we've seen a lot more violence within schools, but also we've seen an increase in violence in prisons. So society's become an extremely, extremely violent place.
So how does that? Because the name of the book you mentioned earlier, I can't remember, but there is that perspective, isn't there? That actually, this is one of the safest times in all of human history to be alive. In fact, the number one killer or likely killer is ourself today. Statistics would say. Yeah, is it just the case of then that we're seeing reported and hearing more about uh, these kinds of crimes, and actually it's just a bad news being spread?
No, I mean, I don't think it's a moral panic. I really do think. I think we're in a period, a real dark period, and I'll elaborate on that. What do I have no doubt about, though, and I don't think anyone would argue this, is the ages of these young people involved in violence and how young it's become. So me, myself, through my own practice and experience, the youngest I've worked with, is approximately 13, who's on a murder charge. 13, and let's put that in perspective, only 18 months before that, he was in primary school. So I have no doubt that it's about the ages, but also the level of violence. So you're talking about, a real knife epidemic. So for me, it's about now how have we gone from something that happened, has always happened, but now with every major city you go, you constantly hear the same thing. So what we needed to do is go, as we say, go into the helicopter view, and let's look at the helicopter view on this. Why is it happening? Where is it coming from? It kind of just happened overnight. What are the drivers?
So what have you learned from that? What have you learned from that view? Like, what are the causes of this? Why is it happening? Why are we seeing this increase, and especially this extreme knife crime?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a five pillar kind of answer to that. My first thing is, and it's not in a chronological order, but these are the 5 areas that I think are areas which are cause for concern. The first area, obviously, you have to start with is the breakdown of the family unit. And I don't mean the breakdown of the family unit as if every child or young person involved in gangs and serious youth violence comes from a broken home, because they don't. Some of those young people come from homes where there's double income parent situation. The thing is, then that's what parents can only control within the house, but they can't control what's happening outside the house. So family, first and foremost, the breakdown in family. And when we talk about the breakdown in family, not necessarily father deficit, or we're talking about the unit of the family. So from a very practical level, do families sit down? Do they eat together? Do they pray together? What activities are the parents offering their young people and their children? What involvement do their parents have in their young people's personal lives? What do they know what their social media looks like? Have they vetted their peer group, their children's peers? Which is a task in of itself. And it's that, it was Jesse Jackson that said, young people don't need presents, they need presents. And in this time of social media and distractions, it's more important that parents are as present than ever. Secondly, so that's the first thing, so the breakdown of the family. Secondly, there's something about communities becoming marginalized and polarized. So quite often we see the violence played out within specific communities. But also there's inequality, because if you look at, for example, if you have a son or a daughter and they're a high achiever and they've got the potential to go on to greatness, but they themselves can only go to a school that's within a specific catchment area, that's within a specific postcode, you've already put that child into a deficit model.
Right.
So they have the ability for social mobility, but because of the nature of the way that education works, they're only allowed to go to a school within a catchment area. So what does that mean? It means that you have schools within these areas that are primarily full of a specific type of profile of community, low income, like almost in some places single ethnicity schools.
Right.
That's not healthy. That's not healthy for the growth of the young person. That's not healthy for their view on the world. And if so, and on top of that, if that school is a notorious school that's connected to high levels of violence, what does that tell you? So I would say majority of the young people aren't involved with gangs, but I guarantee majority of them are aware of gang culture, which is a different. Thirdly, we have to talk about music. and media and games. You've seen a lot more reports coming out recently. A mutual friend of ours, Craig Preetney, just released a report around the effects of social media on young people. But we're in an era now where grime music is pop music. So you'll have, and when we talk about pop, we talk about popular, where in the most remote areas of England, on those young people's smartphone on their playlists is grime and trap.
Yeah.
What is that promoting? Now, there's an argument that art mimics life, but that's not everybody's reality. So with those songs and that music is full of constant references to violence and misogyny and trap and drugs and etc. Are we saying that has no effect on young people? But that's interesting. Fourth one, which might interest you, because it definitely interests me, is I really believe the lack of activity by faith groups.
Okay.
And when I mean activity, I don't mean, I mean members working with their congregation or their Jama'at, as they say in Islam. Members working with their congregation's children. That's not youth work. That's working with young people. There's a difference. So if you look at all the faiths across the places like Birmingham and so on, you look at those communities, look at the spaces that those organizations, those faith groups, look at the spaces that they own. Mm-hmm. Those halls that are left empty unless used once a week. Look at the opportunities that are there. And now if these institutes are only open a specific amount of times a week, like as a person, when I go to wherever I go to a mosque, a church, a temple, when I visit them, when people are showing me their furniture and fixtures and fittings and their chandeliers, that doesn't impress me. And then tell me the type of numbers that they've got. Oh, we've got thousands of people coming every week. That doesn't impress me. What impresses me when they say, and because we've got thousands of young people and people coming every week, we have employed a part-time youth worker. So you're very, people like Merton, but you're also within this country, youth work was started by the church. William Bolden Powell started the Cub Scouts. Many of us have come through the Boys Brigade and the Cub Scouts and the Guides, which were the faith communities offer of engaging with young people. Now, a lot of those organizations are not even visible anymore in the hood. Do you get what I mean? I don't know where they are. So, and it's not about proselytizing or evangelical or calling people. It's about being present. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I really believe prophetic tradition is about being present. If someone's hungry, direct them to where the food is. If they need shelter, direct them to where the shelter is. And I just see really massive gaps within the faith communities across all faiths in terms of engagement around this agenda. Because if the only time faith groups show up around this agenda is to bury the dead, then there's something wrong there.
And the fifth thing?
Really connected to that is knowledge of self. Knowledge of self in terms of who we are and where we sit in this world. Because, we grew up in an era of, we're the children of the diaspora in some cases. But if you look at statistics, 97% of the people from the Caribbean came to England with a trade, Errol. None of them came with a criminal record because you weren't allowed to come to England with a criminal record.
Right.
So how is it a half a century later, 60+% of the prison population are black or minority ethnic?
Wow.
So we have to look at knowledge of self. And knowledge of self means, who are we? What do we stand for? Because our parents and grandparents didn't come here to talk about trapping and talk about bossing gun. They came here for a reason, and it's nothing. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the people that are involved in that is due to circumstance. I'm not naive enough to disregard that, but we have to really look deep within and say, if we call each other king and we referring to each other as king, and I'm not saying that violence doesn't affect the other communities, the white working class communities, etc., because they do in places like Liverpool and places like Stoke and all these areas. You see a high number of white working class young people involved in gang culture. But in terms of the disproportionality within the criminal justice system, is predominantly people of color.
And a lot of people today are listening, and they're going to be practitioners, or they're going to be teachers, or they're going to be parents or youth workers. And I'm sure as you listen, you can relate to some of the major reasons why we're facing some of the challenges that we have with our young people. Let's just unpack them a little bit. So the first one in particular, family breakdown. How much of this is about, and the whole thing about lack of parental involvement and engagement. What I've seen a lot of time is that there are single parent families. Daddy's off the scene.
Yeah.
Mommy's now trying to raise the kids on her own. And she hasn't got the time to be with the kids because she's going and working maybe a couple of jobs to keep the house going. And now she's not able to check on homework and put time in and give the attention needed. She's doing so much. Kids now kind of growing up without certain boundaries and things in place to be able to just stay in the straight and narrow. And so many moms I'm working with and have worked with are finding themselves in this scenario. Like, what are some of the solutions? How do we overcome that barrier? Is it about parental education? Is it about schools getting more involved and changing their tact with engaging with parents? How do you deal with it?
Okay, so let's go with the family. Now, no matter what culture you're from, the concept of rites of passage has been totally ripped away from young men in this country. So whether you're from the Amazon basin, up north, the mining towns, the Caribbean, Africa, historically men went through a rites of passage. In some cultures, that means when you reach a certain age, you're given a task and you have to find where your ancestors came from. In other cultures, it's you lead the prayer. In other cultures, you can go down the social club with your dad. You can't drink alcohol, but you can have an orange juice. In other cultures, you can have the chicken breast on a Sunday. It's interesting how rites of passage pans out. It's been totally removed. Rites of passage have been replaced with what? Counterfeit masculinity. Mm-hmm. So whereas masculinity used to be defined by certain behaviors or certain tasks or certain responsibilities, it's often been replaced now with what? Have you had unprotected sex? Have you linked a girl? Do you carry a shank? What do you smoke? What do you own? And because that rites of passage has been removed, it hasn't been replaced with anything. So in terms of a lot of young men, unfortunately, the gang has replaced that rites of passage.
Right.
And that's a real sad thing to say, but it's true. In terms of schools, it's a question more than a statement. What I would ask is, if we lose more young people to knife crime and gun crime than extremism in this country, responding to extremism and radicalization and right-wing extremism, etc., is important. It's very important. But we lose more young people to gangs and knife crime in this country. However, there's a statutory response upon every school, college, every public sector space to respond effectively to counter any issues relating to extremism. Mm-hmm. My question is, why is there not a statutory response to respond to gangs and serious youth violence? And why I say, I've got a theory on it, and that is because we still hold it to be a criminal justice issue as opposed to a public health issue.
Right. I hear you. So that's governmental. That's got to come from the top, I guess.
Yeah, it's got to come to the top because we've got kids now dying in school uniform. They're going to school in the morning and coming out of school and getting knifed up in uniform. Mm-hmm. It's serious. I was reading some statistic yesterday around the amount of young people that get excluded weekly across the UK for racism. Mm-hmm. Wow. So there's some conversation that has to be had around moral compass and a value base.
Mm. How soon does that conversation have to happen? we know that the families are broken down, divorce rates, you know, homes are divided, and you know, for me, it's a big deal when a young man or woman doesn't have that strong role model, father figure in their life that is engaged emotionally, not just physically in the house. It's a big gap. It's a big gap to fill. Can anything be done about that? I know it's a big question. I know I'm asking like the big question, but can anything be done about that?
Of course, I believe it can.
Yeah.
I believe it can. I don't think. I think. I hope there will be a renaissance, but I do think that it can be. But what we have to do is everybody has to look at it as their issue, because now it's now grown out of these traditional violent areas, the big cities, and entering into the smaller areas. You know, I'm going into white working class, middle class areas. And when I'm asking those young kids what they're listening to on their phones, they're telling me about trap music.
Yeah, of course.
They're talking about they're not listening to Justin Bieber.
Do we have to challenge? Do we have to challenge political correctness?
I think we have to really you know this concepts of righteous indignation, and I think with the word righteous indignation has been dumbed down. And there's not any moral critics anymore, you know. And because there's very few moral critics anymore, you know, it's almost like there's a free-for-all. We have to, all you need to do is sit down for half a day and go on YouTube and study what's being said. And then when you look at the amount of views that some of these videos are getting, millions of views. Somebody's listening to it.
We talked about the second thing was about communities being marginalized and polarized, and in so many ways. How do we overcome that?
It's a big question, man. I think we need a separate podcast for that.
It's a big deal, man.
Look, let's do a bit. Let's do a bit of history. But cities like Liverpool, London, they were our parents and grandparents and white working class people. Those cities were built upon an unskilled labour workforce. So if you look at Birmingham, for example, if you look at some of the big industries that we've lost in the last 10, 15 years, we've lost Rover, we've lost HP Source, we've lost, some big companies that historically, if school weren't for you, because some people's school doesn't work for them, but you could go into those companies and get a job for life, which obviously aided your social mobility. So if you look across the cities like Birmingham now, you don't see industry anymore. All those areas that were industrial areas have now been replaced by bourgeois flats and city living. So my question therein is, so where do the unskilled labour workforce go? Not everyone can work in the bull ring. So where do they go? And the answer is clear. They're going to touch the road, because you've got this tier of young people that aren't accessing employment. So the road is an option. And you see it's replicated in London, in Liverpool, in Manchester.
So you talked earlier about schools and the way that school choices are made and having to be choose from a certain postcode area or locality. Is that something that should be changed? How else do we demarginalize? How else do we get these communities to be not? I mean, whether you go to America or you go to other countries in the world, you always find that there are communities that are segregated. You got Chinatown, and then you've got, little this, and it's all. Is it? Do people want to not be where people are like them?
Cultural silos.
Yeah.
No, but there's nothing wrong with cultural silos.
Yeah.
The problem we have is it's not cultural silos we're talking about economic silos. So those people that you mentioned, like the Chinatowns of this world and other areas, levels that have high South Asian communities, those areas are underpinned by economics.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of those areas, even though some of them are high deprived areas, from the top of that area to the bottom of the area, there's business, there's commerce. If we want to talk about the black community, let's have an honest conversation, show me a strip of black businesses with more than 10 shops in a row.
I don't know one.
You can't? Exactly. And we've been here 70 years at minimum, en masse.
I think you'd be more likely to see a Polish one.
I would say, exactly. And so there has to be a conversation about economics or blackonomics. And what does that mean? That means you've got lack of pro-social modeling. So if those who are doing the pro-social modeling are those who are on the road, as opposed to those who own the businesses, or those who are the CEOs, or those who are the head teachers and the teachers. I mean, look, this is really important. If you're in environments that you don't see any role models, does that have an effect? Of course it has an effect. So why can't we have a conversation about that? Some of these communities, and don't get me wrong, I know some teachers, they don't necessarily live in the communities that they work, but they're good practitioners. Mm-hmm. But there's got to be something that's got to be said where you have a community that's predominantly one ethnicity, mm-hmm. and you do not see anyone from that community represented in that school. And if they are, it's usually a TA or a dinner lady or or something like that. Not an elite. Does that have an effect? Of course, because where's the mirroring? The last time I looked, out of 3,000 secondary schools in the UK, there's only 39 head teachers that are black. Those are some heavy numbers. And we've got to ask ourselves, well, if we talk about raising aspirations, we have to look at inequality. 39 out of 3,000.
Wow.
So what does that tell us? Where do these young people find inspiration from? You hear, they constantly have been hearing for the best part of 10 years, black boys are underachieving. Errol, 15 male black or mixed race teachers in the UK.
There's what?
Out of about 3,000 secondary schools. 15 black male head teachers in the whole of the UK, approximately. So what we're talking about is a systemic issue here. We're not talking about, there's something behind the gun and the knives. There's something about, as a society, we're thinking, well, if we want to raise young people, and I'm talking about all young people, if we want to raise them and give them equality of opportunity, then there has to be representation within these spaces.
So what about the third point you mentioned about gaming and music?
Well, look, I'm going to be a bit biased because I'm from the B-boy area. So I grew up on the Public Enemies of this world and the Rakims, the Big Daddy Kanes. And when I wasn't getting the history, when they were teaching me about drawbridges and castles in secondary school, I used to plug into my Public Enemy because that's where I'd get knowledge of self from. Because I weren't connecting with castles and drawbridges, it wasn't doing anything for me. It was interesting as well. We didn't have the history around the diaspora, about colonialism, about slavery. We didn't have that history.
Is this where they're finding their knowledge of self today, through Stormzy and the likes? Is that what's happening?
I think Stormzy is an interesting character in that, because he's an academic. A lot of people may not know that. Okay. He's an academic. He worked. What I'm seeing from his interviews, he had a job and so on. He's very, you don't have to hear him twice to know that he's a talented guy in terms of talent. But and this issue is not about Stormzy. What we're talking about is the culture When last did you hear a film or watch a film called Graduate?
Right.
When last did you see a film called Black British CEO? You didn't. What we're seeing is, though, and a lot of these young people from the inner city, music is their way out. Music is their way out, and I get it. Music, it's easy. It's better that they do music than they're bossing their gun. I get that, and I can see that. However, a lot of the young people out there look up to these artists as role models, as soul models, not even role models, as soul models.
Right.
So if we're promoting violence and misogyny en masse all the time, and these young ones, you see, what's interesting is you'd mentioned mum earlier as a case study, and mum holds down 2 jobs. So mum's driving, if she's driving the little one to school in the morning in the back, but Radio 1's playing.
Mm-hmm.
Or not even Radio 1's playing, just radio's playing. And every other sentence and line is referring to us as niggers or referring to women as bitches and hoes. Little Jay in the back is taking all that in. Can it shape his worldview? Well, I'll leave that for your listeners to answer that for themselves. But my point is that where are the filters?
We have to take
There's very few filters.
We have to, as adults and parents, we have to take responsibility.
That's it. There's some things that are out of our hands, but there's other things that are not out of hand. So we got to constantly check. Well, what does our moral compass say? Because, someone was saying to me the other day we were just talking about carnival, and I said to him, bro, listen, are you saying to me you're cool with your sister going to carnival and a stranger grabbing your sister and daggering her? Is that where we're at? That's not where I'm at. A stranger's daggering your sister. No. So where does the values come from?
Wow.
I'm sorry to mention daggering on your show.
So what about faith groups, our churches and our mosques and our temples having a great time on Sunday or Friday whenever they're meeting? And are we responding effectively? You think not?
Look, all right. I've got a really close colleague of mine he's graduated in Christian theology. He's a youth worker. And he said to me once, Ray, I don't go church. And I said, what do you mean you don't go church? He goes, I go church, but in my mind, church isn't a building. Church is how you engage with your community. And it's always stayed with me. And I get it. And don't get me wrong, church is a building and mosque is a building. And temple is a building and synagogue and gurdwara and all these things, they're buildings. And they have a role to play. But brethren, and this is from my heart, what's the point of us week in, week out entering our faith spaces and we're saying that we're celebrating our faith and we're praising a higher being, and there's people sitting outside our buildings who are cracked out, who are broken, who are hungry for knowledge, who just want someone to talk to, who are that single mother, who's that person with an illness. And I'm happy to be corrected here because I'm not necessarily a man of faith in the sense of well-versed, but the little that I do know is that the prophets and the prophetic tradition is that they walked amongst the people. They walked amongst the people. They didn't come to build buildings. They came to help people. And not every person's going to come inside that building. So what does that mean? We have to go to them. I see a beautiful thing. You like yourself. You're from Birmingham. That time when I'm coming off the train and you're coming through town, there's a queue. And the queue is like the Alton Towers ride. And it's for people eating food, round by Moore Street. The Sikh community pull up their vans, they open their doors, and they feed the people. And don't get me wrong, there's a couple man in that queue, Errol, who I think, you're just there for the food, you don't need it. But that's cool, because it creates agency and it creates community. my point is that, yeah, that's the nourishing part of the food, but also there's something about us being there just as human to human.
Yeah, it's practical. We've got to get practical,
Simple.
guys. We've got to step out. Like you said, we are the church. You know, just got to be the light wherever you are and not get comfortable. If you're really going to make a difference, make a change. And the last thing you said was about self-knowledge. How do we overcome that challenge in a time when we have marginalized and polarized communities? How do we overcome that challenge in a time when there's fear of extremism and all these different things? And the enlightened few are the enlightened few. How do we get that? How do we attain that knowledge of self?
Well, we're in You see, we're in very interesting times. From the Black community's perspective, we've never had respite. We have good times and we have better times, but we've never had respite. Whether it be our relationship with the police, whether it be our relationship with the education system, the prison system, things are improving. Equality is getting a lot better. But when we talk about knowledge of self, the blueprints are already there. What did Marcus Messiah God, what did he say? He said, a people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. But when we look at the Malcolms and the Martins and the Marcuses of this who've gone, they didn't do what they did and said what they said to be put on T-shirts and posters. That's not what they were about. They didn't do that for that. They done it so people could implement the teachings within their society and their communities. So, for example, if that local youth centre has been closed down, what now? We don't find an option for our young people. No, we find an option and we pool the small resources that we got and we put them on the coaches and we hire out the sports hall.
This is not happening. We get this, but it's not happening. People are not thinking like this. They're more inclined to pull each other down and to think divisively, or build their own monuments or mountains and not work together.
Well, it's my mantra. Yeah, it's my mantra that I've worked with over many few years now, and it's one of the best things I've ever. When people often talk about Black quotes and African quotes, and they tend to kind of like really try and like push them in October. Yeah. But just for reference, you're allowed to speak about African tradition outside of October. Yeah. But you've seen it. I talked about it. It's something that inspires me, and I look at it every now and then. And the saying goes, if we do not induct the people into the village, they will burn it down to feel its warmth. Wow. Simple. So a few years ago, when we saw the riots, that's what you saw, the village getting burnt down, because young people no longer felt part of society. Yes, there was a trigger to it, but if we don't induct them into the village, they will burn it down to feel its warmth. And that burning down doesn't just mean riots. That means disrespect for parents. That means disrespect for elders. Now, but also what's interesting, and this is something that I really like to reiterate, many a person who's on road are still very respectful for their families, still have love and care for their youngers as well, understand the power of education, understand the power of business. And one of the things I will say in defense of a lot of people who are caught up in that game is that deep down they know it's about economics. It's about finding a way to get out. I work in the prisons, King. I walk the wings. I deliver training and development programs. I work with guys who are doing years, and they know. But like we people often talk about Malcolm X. And if we look at Malcolm. I mean, everyone knows the story of Malcolm X, but one of the things that people recognize, he was a persistent offender, not a one-off, not twice. If you look at his mugshots online, he was a persistent offender. Yeah. And when he committed to greatness, he started with reading and studying. That's where it started. And once you start that reading and studying pathway for knowledge of self, and you get the hook, a human's unapologetic when they're ready to change. So when we look at young men caught up in the game or caught up in the prison system, I don't see criminals per se. I see potential Malcolms. However, there has to be structure for them. So like I said, if you think about young men being released, who's meeting them at the gate? Is it our communities? Is it the faith communities? Or is it the man them? Are we creating a space for them within our families and in our communities? What are we doing with them? So this is the thing. So, Malcolm's story is an interesting one because he didn't come from affluency. He came from the road to go into debate in Oxford Union. And there's something interesting as well, Errol. There was one of the times in his autobiography and in his story where his house got attacked. And he made his way home, but he was scheduled to speak in a different part of the States that evening. His house got attacked. And did you know that he just went home and checked that everyone was okay and he flew out and did the speech? Because he was selfless when it came to change in the community. He had a clear vision. Most of us would be like, boy, man can't make it, king. He was there. And that's an interesting thing. So
sacrifice.
We're short of leaders, man. We're short of leaders.
So just in wrapping up, Ray, tell us first of all how we find out more about the work you do. How do we find you online? How do we connect with you?
Yeah. I mean, Twitter, you can catch me on @Gangology. @Gangology, GANGOLOGY. All the other platforms. You can catch me on so my email's ray@antiviewviolence.com. But I'm happy to connect with people. And, just so your audience know, we met in passing about 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, when we were both starting out as young mentors. And I've never forgot that. And I'm proud, not that I'm proud as in I'm your elder, I'm proud that you've pushed the needle, brother. And you've tried to, when I saw you all those years ago in the Rotunda, that's how long ago it was.
Wow.
I remember. And we both starting out our mentoring careers, and to see where you are now, still doing the same work. You've put a serious shift in. So, I hope you're blessed and you get the blessings that can keep you going, because you're shining a light on an issue that some people really deep down want to go away, but it's not happening. So I thank you for inviting me.
No, really, really, I'm blessed to have had you on this platform having this conversation, and it's such a big deal. And the only way it moves forward is if we talk about it. And we have to talk. We have to engage. We can't. This is not a thing we can do in silos. The problem's too big. But I really believe as well, like the opportunities, the possibilities, if we are willing to see beyond some of the stuff that the news is throwing at us as well. I'm not saying it's not real, the issues, jail, the stats, they're all there. But we're also living in some of the greatest times in history as well, whether there are opportunities, whether through technology, whether through just the internet, the world being flat as it is now, we can pretty much do a lot of things. I think if we really pull our resources together and we somehow figure out how to expose our young people to some of these different things in different parts of the country and of the world, we could help them to transform their minds and their thinking. We've got to get creative, we've got to get innovative, we've got to work together to help to turn the tide here. But Ray, I'm grateful, man. Thank you so much for your time today, bro.
And yourself.
God bless you.
And yourself, man. Yeah, and peace.